So this morning I thought I'd talk a wee bit about why people come to therapy. And the I mean, obviously that's different for everybody. They've all got maybe a specific reason, or the kind of general malaise that they're kind of unhappy, or things aren't working out the way that they thought they might. So they've usually, by the time they're in my chair, they've usually exhausted all sorts of other things as well. So, it's not working chatting to the family, it's not working chatting to their pals, or they've been to see their GP. I get lots of GP referrals, and it's understood that they kind of need a bit more focus, and so they end up in my room. One of the things to understand is that that usually means that the things that have been serving them in their lives, their ways of being, are no longer serving them, and so there definitely needs to be some change. Now, how do we gather those things that serve us? How do we get to that place where um we've got all these things happening in our lives, and we want to sort of unpack them. And this coming to therapy isn't about throwing the baby out with the bathwater. It's about being selective about how you use the things that have been helpful in the past, or whether or not they're kind of just really unhelpful now. So that's the first thing, is sort of understanding that. And also, it isn't it doesn't need to be a scary experience. It can be a really fun experience. I've had loads of laughter in my room, because we do get into a state of a kind of exaggerated care for things. And I'll probably go into this in more detail in another video, but for now, so when we're becoming, so as soon as we're born, which, by the way, none of us were invited to, so that's worth understanding. Nobody is here. There's 8 billion people on the planet. Not a single one is here by invitation. Where none of us RSVP'd to a request for us to be here. We're here by proxy. Somebody else made that decision. Now, that may have been a very good and joyful decision, it may not, but however, so the question about, why am I here? What is the meaning of life? Those kinds of questions are really valid questions, because, you didn't plan it. You weren't in the plan. So understanding that is really important. The thing about where you're born really matters. There are so many expectations embedded in culture. I mean, in Scotland specifically, if we just take Scotland, I mean, even between Edinburgh and Glasgow, there's huge differences between a commercial city and an industrial city, and what the expectations are from families. Don't get me started on class, but anyway, so there's lots and lots of cultural expectations which are probably served us in the 18th or 19th centuries, but maybe don't quite so much now. So thinking about that stuff, where you are in the family, Taylor Swift's right. If the eldest daughter is the first lamb to the slaughter, that is a really tricky sort of person to be in the family. That you've got two parents, or you had two people who were in some ways loved up or very drunk or whatever it was, but you are the consequence of that. You end up they've got no rule book, so you're their kind of template for design. What are they going to do with this little person? And this is not, therapy is not about blame either. It's just about kind of understanding context. Context is everything in your life, and once you know that, life becomes much more kind of accessible. And instead of like a big ball of ripped down knitting and all tangled up, you can actually begin to sort of see the threads and how they make you function or help you function. So you've got your position in the family, which matters. It absolutely matters, because you know, for the firstborn, they're at sea, they're no longer loved up, they've not got the same kind of freedoms. You are their kind of practice. And then the next child that comes along is, you know, there's maybe a bit of a kind of easing up of the tensions with that child, because they kind of understand, they're a bit less fearful, and also they've got another wee helper. So anyway, as it goes on in the family, you know what your family is, but don't understand that we all had the same parents. That's my point. We didn't all have the same parents. We all had different parents. They were different psychologically, and you know, probably in a different situation financially. All sorts of things were different. So there's that. Then when we get to school, there's layers and layers and layers of stuff going on at school. You know, some of us had some great teachers. All it took was one bad teacher, one teacher who was having issues of their own or whatever. Whatever we are soaking in as children is part of our becoming. And we don't have a delete button. There's no delete button. There's no kind of, right, okay, I can just kind of forget all about that. Because whether you think you've forgotten about it or not, it's still an underlying unconscious motivation. And so none of that is, you know, if only we did have a delete key, how great would that be? Anyway, we don't. So schools, piano teachers, rugby coaches, football coaches, whatever, they are all influencing us. We're getting messages constantly about what is required of us. What are parents demanding of us? What are schools demanding of us? And we are learning all the time new ways of being and what is going to work for us. There's, you know, some people might really cultivate their sense of humour. If you've got a GSOH, then actually you are less likely to be bullied, because you can find ways of making people laugh, and that de-escalates tension, stuff like that. Anyway, that's another video as well. So I think that if you understand your context, that is really helpful, and that is part of what happens in therapy. You actually, we would encourage you to kind of look back and look at how you've become, because most of us don't really understand that until we're in a certain situation like therapy, or maybe we're in an in-depth kind of philosophical group of mates or something like that. That'd be really helpful. More of that. Let's have tons more of that. Anyway, understanding that is really helpful. When we're fitting in, when we're becoming, we're doing lots and lots of fitting in, and fitting in is the opposite of belonging. People think, oh, if I fit in a bit more, I'll get a sense of belonging, but that's not the case, because what you actually do is you have to shave something off yourself or add a bit, amplify a bit of yourself in order to please someone else, because whatever you're bringing to the party or the table is not quite enough, or it's not quite the thing that you imagine is going to fit in, or their actually messaging is not going to fit in. So learning that is really important as well. So if you're the guy that actually is in the locker room and they're talking over there kind of disrespectfully about somebody, and you just stay silent, or you actually start to laugh or something like that, I get that. I mean, we've all done that. We've all found a way of actually not becoming a target, and so understanding that about yourself, and then realizing that you don't have to be that guy or that person is also really helpful. Blathering on too much.